some point. Before I get started, I want to thank my friend Frank Mecklenburg, Michael Simonson from the LBI, Christina Shuttleworth, who I understand is here, which is a great honor to have her here with us. And I'd like to thank my old friend and dear friend who's not with us, and that's Monica Richards, who first gave me a copy of the book, which was a duplicate from the LBI collections, and she gave it to me, I think, in 1976, and I've been reading it regularly. So it's unbelievable that there are all these other people who want to read this book. I don't know how many of you have actually read it, but in the Q&A, you might talk about your reading experiences. Okay, let's see if we can get this moving here. Okay. Now, there's some beautiful nuances in the question of the titles of the book. So just to get us going on the theme of emancipation and enlightenment, this is the Berg Publishers edition that was then replaced. For those of you who read this edition, many thanks to Michael Weiss, who decided to put this into print. I was remembering I was at a dinner party with him in New York, and he said, "Oh, I'm planning to reprint this book." That's so wonderful to have it available in a modern paperback. But notice here, emancipation, enlightenment, and Haskalah. Okay, so if we call it the daughter of the Enlightenment, then we're suggesting that the Enlightenment is this intellectual entity that produces young Fanny von Arnstein, and she instantiates the Enlightenment. Another way to look at it altogether was the German title, Fanny von Arnstein oder die Emanzipation, which is much more positioning the issue as personal emancipation, of something absolutely different. And one of the themes of my little introduction here, which I'm obsessed with, which is the fragile legacy of the Haskalah. So the Haskalah is the Jewish Enlightenment, and a deep question for this period is whether the Haskalah in Germany was a success, a stalled success, or possibly a failure. So the ITZIG daughters are quite amazing. This was quite a family. The father, Daniel ITZIG, had been granted, and his family had been granted, the most esteemed special emancipation. And if you look at the fine print, you notice that that meant they didn't pay any Jewish taxes. So this is already from her birth, the question of the heritage of the court Jews. Were you free to be superior, or were you free to help other Jews? That's a fundamental question. And here we have Felix Mendelssohn's mother, the sister of Fanny, Leah Mendelssohn. And here's Sarah ITZIG. I can talk a little bit about her because she's coming into the fore now for historians and even novelists. And this is her sister. I love this picture. Cecily von Aeschylus, who also was in an arranged marriage, also lived in Vienna, also had somewhat of a salon. Now, Michael Weiss, in his introduction, says that Fanny and her sister and her other siblings were brave and passionate champions for the rights and acceptance of Jews. Well, that's something I'd really like to problematize, because I'm not sure they were brave. I'm not sure they were passionate about civil rights for Jews in general. And as I grew older and kept on reading the same books over and over again and kind of writing the same books over and over again, I came to be a little more ironic about the possible hypocrisies of the salon women. Did they have to ignore nasty slights in what Hannah Arendt would say was the price of social glory? Now, here you see a picture on the right of Fanny von Arnstein's daughter, Henrietta, who was originally named Judith. I find that so interesting. The names themselves tell you so much about these people, with her own daughter. Now, the question here is, how long does a family in this setting remain Jewish? So Fanny herself did not convert, but her daughter married someone Jewish, and they both converted, and the daughter therefore is raised as a Catholic. And as you see in Hilde Spiel's introduction to her 62 volume, she meets with all of the descendants of Fanny von Arnstein. Was this the beginning of racial suicide? So the notion of racial suicide is that high conversion, high intermarriage, low birth rates, late ages of marriage over the whole of the 19th century were leading the Jews to, as it were, commit group suicide without the Nazis. It's a shattering critique of this whole stratum of society. Now, Gershom Scholem and the Christmas tree, right? They don't belong together, but here they are. Okay, so here's the Christmas tree, and one of the most amazing little vignettes of the Fanny von Arnstein life is that she brings the Christmas tree to Vienna. How can you be Jewish if you're bringing a Christmas tree? But are you really Christian even if you do bring a Christmas tree? Now, in 1964, right around the time that Spiel was writing this book, Gershom Scholem wrote this trenchant essay called German-Jewish Symbiosis, It Never Existed, or The Myth of the German-Jewish Symbiosis. And he made this totalistic, fatal critique of the entire generation, that the false start for emancipation meant this was not a symbiosis because the Jews were not bringing Judaism to German or Austrian culture. They were effacing their own history, even if they stayed Jewish, and were absorbing and becoming vessels for Christian culture. Now I want to bring just a couple of salon women into contrast here. So for when you think about Fanny von Arnstein, think about some of them. So here's Amalia Bear. Now notice both Fanny von Arnstein and Amalia Bear get rid of the head covering. That was super, super radical and very brave of them. Amalia Bear, the mother of Giacomo Meyerbeer, has 4 children, and her way of balancing Judaism and German identity at the time of the Napoleonic Wars is very similar to Fanny von Arnstein's, with a couple of exceptions. One is that she works much harder on emancipation. The other one is that she organizes reform services in her home. But in the future generations, she doesn't save Judaism. Her son stays Jewish, although it's not entirely clear, or all her sons stay Jewish. It's not clear if they've sort of been bought off with a promise of inheritance if they stay Jewish. But by the 3rd generation, they're not Jewish anymore. This is Moses Mendelssohn's daughter, Dorothea. I've kept out all of her many, many names, but she's a great contrast to Fanny von Arnstein because she didn't pay the price of social glory. She was too rebellious. She was too intellectual, you might say, although that's probably debatable. So she divorces her Jewish husband. She has difficulty. Her sons actually become Nazarene painters, and she ends up very poor and quite unhappy. A true Catholic, but quite unhappy. And so the question is, who is Moses Mendelssohn's true daughter? When Hilde Spiel called her book The Daughter of the Enlightenment, you could say, and she does say, she lived out Moses Mendelssohn's beliefs. Well, Moses Mendelssohn was lucky to die in 1786 before all these questions became so monumental. Now, one of the beautiful things about this book that is just heartrending for me is that Hilde Spiel identifies so strongly with Fanny von Arnstein. And we can talk more about that, and maybe Christina Shuttleworth will give us some more concrete information. But I found that a very, very beautiful thing. And in reading her memoir about her life in Vienna before she goes to London, it's tremendously evocative and beautifully written. And there are many times when there would be a sentence and I would want to say, wait, I need more on this. I need more on this. Let's go deeper, which obviously we cannot do today. But the fact that she identified with her as an exceptional Jew who was sort of Jewish, but sort of not Jewish, had noble friends, mixed with court society, but never converted. This was a very special position that obviously meant a great deal to Hilde Spiel as she was writing this book. And she leaves for London for Vienna a year or 2 afterwards, which is also very interesting. I almost got the idea, and this is going to sound a little wacky, that the bio was kind of kosherizing Vienna, like showing, okay, there were these profound Jewish experiences that are part of Austrian history and German history, which is, the same impulse I had, 70, 50 years later. Okay, let's do a contrast to a woman that you may have heard of, RAHEL VARNHAGEN. This is my friend Liliana's wonderful, wonderful re-edition of the RAHEL VARNHAGEN bio that Arendt wrote in 1929 for her habilitation. And this is a beautiful introduction, but it's fascinating that she puts Hannah Arendt on the cover rather than RAHEL VARNHAGEN. And Barbara Hahn, who's a noted German literary scholar, has tried to restore Rahel VARNHAGEN's writings to the canon. Now, this is an intellectual history, which we could never do for Fanny von Arnstein, because she didn't leave behind this corpus of letters. And wrapped up in the Barbara Hahn work is this very profound, I would say even aggressive move to say a Jewish woman's letters are part of high culture and are part of literature. They're not just like a side thing that hostesses do, but it's really profound. A difference between Rahel VARNHAGEN and Fanny von Arnstein is that Rahel VARNHAGEN was wounded. She was wounded by how far she had come and how the attacks on her emerge because she's come so far. And she's not protected by the wealth. She's not protected by the arranged marriage. And in this sense, she was friends with Fanny von Arnstein, and she loves to stay with her at her palatial homes. Who knows what she said behind her back. Okay, I found this in Der Spiegel in a little article about Hannah Arendt, and I just thought it was so hilarious in a way that the Der Spiegel editors probably don't think of. So here, the only two people I could identify, some of you could work on this. Oh, that's Mendelssohn, I think. This is meant to be Rahel VARNHAGEN. This is Bettina von Arnheim, Friedrich Schlegel. But I thought it was hilarious because of the notion of the Last Supper. You know, is this the end of Judaism? Okay, I'm about to close. I have two more slides. Fanny von Arnstein was buried in the Währing cemetery, a Jewish cemetery, in 1818. And her body appears to have been removed from the cemetery for some kind of racial analysis in 1942. And I went online just before we started, and there's a rehabilitation project for the gravestones, but I don't think we really know about the corpse itself. And the question is, should we read more into this? Is this like the burial of Judaism, the burial of Fanny von Arnstein, the legacy and the homage being ripped away by taking the body away, for racial analysis? It's a disturbing moment, and I'll be happy when I read in some Austrian Jewish newspaper that they've found her body and her proper grave. Two books I would just like to promote from my friends. One is a book about SARA Levy, who was her sister, and this is all done by Nancy Sinkhoff, who also has produced a CD, and then a fabulous novel, just an unbelievably gorgeous novel by Lauren Belfer called After the Fire, which is a fictional reconstruction of Fanny Hensel, who's the niece of Fanny von Arnstein.